Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep today into the Soham murders.
Mm-hmm.
It's a criminal case that, I mean, even 2 decades later, it still feels like a benchmark for horror, doesn't it? And for investigative endurance, too.
Absolutely. And it really exposed some profound, necessary, I suppose, systemic failures in public safety.
Yeah, exactly. This isn't just about looking at a shocking crime. It feels more like an investigation into how trust and technology and, well, bureaucracy really failed those two 10-year-old girls.
That's precisely the mission of this deep dive, yeah.
Yeah.
We're analyzing the murders of Holly Marie Wells and Jessica Amy Chapman in Soham, Cambridgeshire. That was back on August 4th, 2002.
Right.
And we've got a pretty expensive stack of sources here covering the massive search effort, the trial, which was just excruciating to follow, the criminal profiles of Ian Kevin Huntley, the school caretaker, and his girlfriend Maxine Carr, who was actually a teaching assistant at the girls' school.
Which is a key detail.
A crucial detail. And maybe most importantly, we're looking at the governmental inquiry that came afterwards, the Bichard inquiry.
When you look at the resources that poured into this case, it's just staggering. You can see why it stands out.
Oh, completely.
That investigation became one of the most intense, most extensive searches in British criminal history. It lasted, 13 days?
13 agonizing days, yeah, before that heartbreaking discovery.
And the initial timeline, it just hits you how immediate the tragedy was.
It really does. The girls were last definitively seen around, 6:30 p.m. on that Sunday evening.
Yeah.
And their parents reported them missing at 9:55 p.m. That was just minutes after Holly's 8-point fur curfew had passed.
Just minutes. The speed they vanished.
Yeah.
And then the medical evidence later suggesting asphyxiation was the likely cause of death. Let's focus first on that initial sequence of events. Because the details of that Sunday, they're just so important for understanding the innocence that was, exploited.
Absolutely. So Jessica, she lived on Brook Street, and she was visiting Holly at Red House Gardens for a barbecue.
Right.
And there's this small detail in the sources, quite touching actually. Jessica had brought Holly a necklace engraved with an H. She'd just bought it on a family holiday.
Oh, wow. It just speaks volumes about their friendship, doesn't it? Little best friends.
Totally inseparable. And after dinner, and this is the detail I think that just burned itself into the national consciousness, the girls changed into those identical Manchester United football shirts.
The replica ones, yeah.
Replica shirts. One was Holly's, the other belonged to her older brother, Oliver. This was around maybe 3:15 in the afternoon.
And Holly's mom took that photo of them, smiling on the shirts. That was at 5:01 or 4 p.m.
That's the one. And that photograph, released so widely, it just became the tragic symbol of the whole case.
It really did. So they left the Wells' house without telling anyone around 6:01 p.m.
Yeah.
And their plan was simple, wasn't it? Just walk to the local sports center, buy some sweets from a vending machine.
That was it, just a quick trip out. And the CCTV footage, that gives us the last confirmed sighting of them alive and unsupervised.
Okay.
It shows them arriving at the sports center at 6:28 p.m. But the key movement, the really critical one, happens right after that.
Okay, what's that?
As they walked back, they walked directly past the home of Ian Huntley at 5 College Close.
Right, the caretaker's house. He was the senior caretaker at Soham Village College, the local secondary school.
That's him.
So, hang on. If their parents had taught them, be careful with strangers, don't talk to people you don't know.
Yeah.
How did Huntley, this man they maybe only knew vaguely by sight, how did he get two girls who were probably thinking about getting home for curfew? How did he get them inside his house?
Well, the sources are pretty clear on this. The opportunistic lure, the hook, was Maxine Carr.
Right. His girlfriend. Their teaching assistant.
Exactly. He exploited his relationship with her. Carr was their teaching assistant at St. Andrew's Primary, and both girls really liked her. He told them she was inside the house.
But she wasn't.
No, she was miles away, visiting her mother in Grimsby. So he used that connection, that trusted figure, to basically overcome their natural wariness of him, a male stranger.
God, that's chilling.
Yeah.
And the timeline gets sealed by technology, doesn't it? Jessica's phone.
Yeah, her Nokia 617 mobile phone. It was switched off at 6:46 p.m.
So that window, 6:28 p.m., they're seen walking towards his house.
Really?
6:46 p.m., the phone goes dead. That's 18 minutes.
Just 18 minutes. That's the crucial period. That's when the abduction and the start of the crime must have happened. It's a terrifyingly small window for something so awful to unfold.
And the parents, they start their own search when Holly misses curfew. Yeah. Then they officially report them missing at 9:55 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
And the resources deployed, I mean, it was immediate and huge, wasn't it? Not a slow burn at all.
No, the response was, well, unprecedented, really, for a missing persons case in a quiet village like Soham. Over 400 police officers deployed straight away.
400.
Yeah. House-to-house inquiries were exhaustive. Hundreds of local volunteers turned out to help search. Even U.S. Air Force personnel from nearby RAF Mildenhall and Lakenheath joined in, searching woods, fields.
Wow.
It was a massive community effort alongside the police.
And the public appeal, driven by that photo in the football shirts, and their descriptions, 4'6", slim build, it just blew up into a national event. Yeah. The fear was just palpable, wasn't it? 2 girls walking home, just vanish.
It really was. And the police, they were obviously on high alert. Initially, they did their due diligence, questioning over 260 registered sex offenders in the area.
Standard procedure.
Yeah, including 15 who were classed as high-risk pedophiles. But they were all eliminated pretty early on, which kind of pushed the investigation away from known threats, towards maybe an unknown local person.
Right.
They also checked out chat room leads, digital stuff, but that all came to nothing.
What about the physical leads? There must have been sightings reported, false hopes. The community would have been desperate.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Every potential sighting was scrutinized. The most prominent false lead, the one that got a lot of press, involved trying to trace the driver of a dark green saloon car.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Near Newmarket.
That's the one on the A142. Witnesses claim the driver was thrashing his arms, supposedly struggling with 2 young girls inside.
Right.
It generated a lot of attention, loads of calls, but ultimately it never connected to the case. It just shows you the sheer volume of, misinformation and misidentification that can swamp these high-profile searches.
And the desperation. It led to the parents appearing on ITV's Tonight program, making those appeals.
Yeah, heartbreaking appeals. And that generated over 2,000 phone calls, tips logged into the police database. That's Holmes 2.
Right, Holmes 2. That's the big police computer system for major incidents, isn't it?
Yeah.
For managing all the data.
Exactly. It's sophisticated, designed to handle massive amounts of information, witness statements, forensic finds, suspect details, cross-referencing everything. But still, managing 2,000 tips, many of them vague or well-intentioned, but wrong, it requires huge manpower, even with the system helping.
So the police are chasing down thousands of leads, dealing with this massive influx of information.
A total deluge, yeah.
And meanwhile, Ian Huntley is actually kind of inserting himself right into the middle of it all.
Right into the narrative, right there in the heart of the community.
How did that work? This strategy of becoming the, quote, unofficial spokesman. Did that riskiness help him or hurt him in the end?
Well, in the short term, it probably delayed suspicion among the general public and the media. They saw him as this helpful, concerned local man. But for the experienced investigators, it definitely heightened suspicion.
How so?
Okay, so on August 5th, that's the day after the girls disappeared, Huntley voluntarily gives an initial statement to police. He claims he spoke to the girls around 6:30 p.m. on his doorstep. He describes them as being happy as Larry. Says they asked if Carr got the teaching job, expressed sympathy when he said no, then just walked off towards the library.
So a very detailed, seemingly helpful account.
Exactly. Plausible, sympathetic. It positioned him perfectly as a key witness, not a suspect, at least on the surface.
The irony is just staggering, though. He spoke to Sky News, BBC Look East, expressing his dismay, being the last known person to see them alive.
It's chilling. The sources even detail him approaching Holly's father, Kevin Wells, at a press conference, offering condolences, saying something like, "Kevin, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize it was your daughter."
Wow. That level of brazen deception right under the media spotlight, it just screams calculation, doesn't it? Almost like he enjoyed controlling the story.
Deeply psychopathic calculation, yeah. And a definite enjoyment in being at the center of it, controlling that narrative. But, despite that smooth media act, the police were suspicious pretty much immediately. A single officer actually visited and searched 5 college close on August 5th, the day after they vanished.
Okay, so really early on. And what were the specific red flags? What did that officer notice that made them think, hang on a minute, even before they had hard evidence?
Well, first off, Huntley was apparently highly agitated, evasive, not the behavior you'd expect from just a concerned witness. And secondly, the officer noted definite signs of aggressive, very recent cleaning inside the house.
Cleaning.
Okay. Huntley tried to explain it away, said something like, "Excuse the dining room, we had a flood," which seemed like a really flimsy excuse.
A flood, right.
Especially when the officer also noticed clothes drying on the washing line outside, even though it had been raining heavily in Soham that day. It just suggested a real rush job to dry something important, possibly evidence.
And later forensic work backed that up, didn't it? That the dining room was a likely spot for the initial attack.
Precisely. Those early suspicions were spot on. The dining room was later identified as a highly probable location for the initial assault.
And the other crucial piece of Huntley's deception was Maxine Carr. Right. She came back from Grimsby and backed up his story.
Yeah, she was vital to his alibi. She returned and publicly supported his family timeline, adding this layer of credibility to him, making him seem less suspicious initially.
She did that televised interview, claiming she was in the bath while Huntley spoke to the girls at the door. She even added that she wished they'd stop them. But looking back, were there clues in what she said? Things that hinted at the deception?
There are a couple things that stood out later, yeah. First, she started talking about Holly in the past tense, saying she was just lovely, really lovely.
The past tense slip.
Exactly. Now, you could maybe put it down to stress or just awkward phrasing, but the court later saw it as a potentially revealing subconscious slip, especially since we know she'd been fully briefed by Huntley on the false alibi by then.
Right.
And also, she gave all these little details about the girls' personalities, calling Jessica a tomboy, mentioning she wanted to be bridesmaid. It made her sound so genuine, like this loving teaching assistant who knew them well, someone who just wouldn't lie to protect a monster.
It painted a picture of normality. But that public pressure, even with Carr covering for him, it must have been immense for Huntley. We know his physical condition started to deteriorate rapidly.
Definitely. By the second week of the search, you could literally see the strain. He lost a lot of weight, couldn't sleep, showed all the signs of insomnia. He was so visibly unstable that on August 13th, a doctor actually prescribed him antidepressants. And the sources describe him breaking down, weeping in front of a police officer, blurting out defensively, "You think I've done it? I was the last person to see them." You know, the mask was slipping. That forced role of the sympathetic neighbor was clearly destroying him.
But the key evidence that really started to shatter their alibi,
Yeah.
it didn't just come from the police watching him. It came from people who knew Carr back in Grimsby, right?
Yes, that was crucial. Specifically, a neighbor of Carr's mother, a woman named Marion Clift.
Okay, what does she see?
On August 6th, that's the day Huntley drove up to Grimsby to pick Carr up, Clift saw them both near the open boot of Huntley's Ford Fiesta.
Right.
Clift described Huntley as looking pale, shaking, and just staring intently into the boot. Carr was standing nearby, apparently weeping with her head bowed.
Staring into the boot.
Yeah, and Clift said that as soon as Huntley realized he was being watched, he just slammed the boot shut really abruptly.
That is suspicious.
Yeah.
It suggests they were either moving something or maybe talking about something really sensitive related to what was in the car.
Exactly. And you link that sighting back to Huntley's appearance back in Soham. He was seen around that time with those 3 vertical scratches on his face, about 3 centimeters long, on his jaw.
Right, the scratches. He claimed his dog did it, Sadie.
Yeah, that was his story. But the police were highly skeptical. The location, the pattern, it just didn't look like a typical dog scratch. It looked much more like defensive wounds, like someone has scratched him during a struggle.
Makes sense.
And on top of that, his behavior when he was supposedly helping with the volunteer searches was also raising eyebrows.
How so?
Instead of, actually focusing on searching for the girls, he was seen asking police officers quite specific questions about how the investigation was going, particularly asking about how long DNA evidence survives, how it's used.
Oh, wow. That's not the behavior of a concerned volunteer. That's someone calculating their chances.
Precisely. It was the action of a very nervous man trying to figure out how long his meticulous cover-up might actually hold.
So the police were definitely closing in. By August 16th, they questioned both Huntley and Carr again for hours, took updated statements, then moved them to a safe house. What were the final pieces just before the bodies were found that really cemented them as the prime suspects?
It was really the corroboration coming out of Grimsby that sealed it pre-discovery. Multiple residents confirmed Carr had been out socializing there on the night of August 4th.
Completely contradicting her story of being home in Soham.
Totally blew her alibi out of the water. And at the same time, reports about Huntley's past, specifically those 1998 rape allegations, started filtering through properly from Humberside police to the Cambridgeshire investigators.
So his history was catching up.
Yeah, it solidified the profile. This wasn't just an odd caretaker. This was a suspect with a hidden, potentially violent past. The net was tightening incredibly fast, really just hours before the bodies were actually...
So the shift from a missing persons case, which everyone was desperately hoping would end well, to a murder investigation, that happened on August 17th, day 13 of the search.
Yeah, that's the moment the true scale of Huntley's depravity really came to light.
How were the bodies found?
The discovery was made by a local gamekeeper, Keith Pryor. It was around 12:30 p.m. He was near RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk, which is about 10 miles east of Soham.
Okay.
Pryor had noticed an unusual and unpleasant smell in the area a few days earlier, but hadn't pinpointed it. On the 17th, he went back with a companion to investigate more closely, and they found them.
Oh, God.
Severely decomposed and charred corpses lying side by side in a dry irrigation ditch about 5 feet deep.
Charred. He tried to burn them. And the forensic timeline here, that was crucial, wasn't it? The state of the bodies. Despite his attempt to destroy evidence with petrol, they brought in a forensic ecologist.
That's right, Dr. Patricia Wiltshire. Her specialty provided really vital non-human evidence.
How's that work? Ecology.
By examining the plants around the ditch, specifically the growth rates of the nettles that had grown up around and even over the bodies slightly. Based on how much they'd grown, she could estimate quite accurately when the bodies had been placed there.
And what did she conclude?
She estimated they'd been put in the ditch almost immediately after the disappearance, close to 2 weeks prior.
Wow. So that directly contradicted any idea that this was some delayed disposal or that he'd panicked later and hidden them. He put them there right away.
Exactly. Planned disposal almost immediately after the murders.
But the police actually had the definitive physical link before the bodies were found, didn't they? The evidence from Soham Village College.
Yes, that was recovered on August 16th, the day before the discovery. During a really intensive search of Huntley's workplace, the college,
What did they find?
officers found the charred and significantly badly cut remains of the girls' Manchester United shirts.
The shirts. In a bin.
In a bin, inside one of the hangars at the college. And the forensic yield from those burnt remnants was just overwhelming.
How specific was it? What did the fibers connect to?
Incredibly precise. Fibers recovered from the shirts matched samples that had already been recovered from 3 key places: Huntley's own clothes, microscopic fibers found on his body, and trace fibers found on surfaces inside his house, 5 college close.
So, irrefutable proof they'd been in his house.
Absolutely. And on top of that, Huntley's fingerprints were found on the lid of the actual bin bag that contained the burnt shirts.
Game over, really.
Pretty much. It established physically that the girls had been in his house and that he had destroyed their clothing at his workplace.
So, with bodies now recovered on the 17th and the clothing evidence secured the day before, the arrests happened very quickly, 4:30 a.m. on the 17th.
Yes.
And Huntley's reaction in custody, it completely changed from that calculated media persona, didn't it?
Oh, completely. He went from composure to just outright evasion and manipulation. His behavior was described as chaotic. He refused to answer any substantive questions.
Yeah.
Appeared confused, very emotionally detached, and then he started exhibiting signs of, well, what seemed like feigned mental illness.
Feigned? Like what?
At one point, he apparently started drooling uncontrollably, which led to him being referred for a psychiatric assessment at Rampton Secure Hospital.
Trying to avoid questioning.
That was clearly the aim, trying to get himself declared unfit for interview. But it ultimately failed. Forensic psychiatrist Christopher Clark assessed him and determined he was competent, just manipulative.
Right. And meanwhile, Carr, her story crumbled almost instantly once she was arrested, didn't it?
Yes, her facade just collapsed. She quickly confessed that she had lied about her whereabouts and about Huntley's story.
What was the exact story Huntley had fed her over the phone that day?
Carr said Huntley had called her in Grimsby, sounding panicked, claiming the girls came in our house.
Right.
He told her Holly had suddenly had a nosebleed, that he'd helped clean her up in the bathroom, and then they'd simply left the house. That was the innocent explanation he gave her.
Yeah, the nosebleed story.
Yes. And then, crucially, he immediately played on his past. He told Carr he was terrified of being falsely accused or fitted up for the girl's disappearance because of that previous unresolved rape allegation from 1998.
Wow. So he used his own past problems to manipulate her into covering for him.
Absolutely. He weaponized his history to secure her complicity. Carr admitted she agreed to concoct the false story purely to protect his reputation and his job security. She bought his story, or at least claimed she did at that point.
That detail about the 98 allegation, using it like that, it's just so cynical.
Utterly cynical. And Carr maintained, even after confessing to the lie, that she didn't believe he'd actually murdered them. When the police finally confronted her with the fact the bodies had been found and the shirts discovered in the bin, her reaction was apparently one of genuine shock. She burst into tears, shouting things like, "No, he can't have been, it can't have been, he hasn't done it."
So even then, she was clinging to the idea he was innocent of murder.
It appears so. Or at least a desperate hope. She only finally seemed to accept his guilt and cut ties completely in December 2002, after all the overwhelming forensic evidence became public knowledge before the trial.
Let's get into that forensic evidence recovered from the house, 5 College Close, and the car, the Ford Fiesta. Because the detail here is crucial. It just systematically dismantled Huntley's later defense that this was all just panic.
The cleaning operation inside the house was incredibly thorough. He'd used some sort of cleaning fluid described as having a lemony smell, trying to eradicate every trace.
But he failed.
He failed. Advanced forensic techniques found distinct traces of blood spatter. And crucially, this wasn't just in the bathroom, where he claimed the accident with Holly's nosebleed happened.
Where else?
They found blood spatter in the hallway, and specifically near the entrance to the master bedroom.
Not consistent with a simple nosebleed or a slip in the bath.
Not at all. Blood spatter in those locations points towards something much more violent occurring outside the bathroom.
And the car. The Fiesta. That basically provided a map to the disposal site, didn't it?
It did, yeah. Even though he'd cleaned it aggressively, the forensic teams found microscopic traces of a very specific mixture of materials: brick dust, chalk, and concrete.
Okay.
And this mixture perfectly matched the type of material used to pave the specific track, the road leading down to that irrigation ditch near RAF Lakenheath where the bodies were found.
Wow. Found where in the car?
Around the wheel arches and embedded in the pedals, like he'd driven right up to the site.
Incredible detail. What else about the car?
Well, the rear seat cover was missing entirely, just gone. And the boot lining, the carpet in the boot, had been hastily replaced with a piece of ill-fitting household carpet. Obvious signs he was trying, frantically but clumsily, to remove any material that might have come into contact with the bodies.
So cleaning the house, cleaning the car, replacing parts of it.
Yeah.
This isn't panic. This is calculated evidence disposal.
Absolutely calculated. And he also went to lengths to create a false paper trail. In the week before his arrest, Huntley paid a local mechanic to change the tires on the Fiesta. But he insisted the mechanic write the receipt using a false name and a false registration number for the car.
Trying to obscure the car's movements around that time.
Clearly. Trying to create an alternate timeline or muddy the waters about when the car was used. Huntley eventually admitted, post-conviction, to setting fire to the bodies using petrol specifically to destroy evidence. He also admitted taping bin liners around his feet at the ditch site to avoid leaving footprints.
And the location choice, RAF Lakenheath. Was that random?
No. He chose it deliberately because his disabled grandmother lived nearby. It gave him a plausible, though false, excuse for being seen driving in that specific area if anyone had spotted him around the time of the disposal. Everything points to calculation, not... So the road to the actual trial, it was delayed a bit by Huntley's attempts to feign mental illness. He spent nearly 2 months detained under the Mental Health Act after his arrest.
The assessment in Rampton.
Yeah. It was a necessary step, legally, to ensure the trial could proceed without him later claiming diminished capacity or fitness to plead.
And the finding by Dr. Christopher Clark was critical there, that Huntley was psychopathic, yes, but not suffering from a major mental illness that would impair his understanding. He knew what he was doing.
Exactly. Clark confirmed he was physically and mentally sound and fully aware of his actions. He was declared competent to stand trial in October 2002.
Although, even being deemed competent, he was clearly under immense strain. He tried to commit suicide in prison in June 2003, didn't he? Before the trial started.
He did. A serious attempt, overdosing on antidepressants he'd managed to hoard in his cell. It just underscores the extreme pressure he felt as the trial loomed.
So the trial finally starts at the Old Bailey in London on November 5th, 2003. And the pleas are interesting. Huntley pleads not guilty to the 2 counts of murder.
Correct.
But he pleads guilty to perverting the course of justice. And Maxine Carr does the same, pleads guilty to perverting the course of justice, but not guilty to the charge of assisting an offender.
That distinction is really important, especially for understanding Carr's eventual conviction and sentence. Perverting the course of justice just means knowingly doing something to obstruct the law in their case, providing that false alibi. They both admitted doing that.
Right.
But the assisting an offender charge against Carr required the prosecution to prove she helped Huntley knowing or believing he was guilty of murder, or another serious arrestable offense related to the deaths. Her defense was that she didn't believe he'd actually killed them when she lied for him.
Okay, got it. So the prosecution, led by Richard Latham QC, they built their case heavily on opportunity and, well, the sheer implausibility of Huntley's story. What was the core argument?
Latham argued it was pure chance. Huntley saw the girls, Carr was away, he seized the opportunity and deliberately lured them in. The phone being switched off at 6:46 p.m. was key, suggesting the murders happened very quickly after they entered the house. Latham acknowledged the difficulty, only one person knows what really happened in that house. But he hammered home the point. 10-year-old girls don't just drop dead. It wasn't credible.
And the prosecution pushed hard on a sexual motive, didn't they? Arguing he had to kill both girls to protect himself, to silence any witness.
Yes, that was central. Why kill both? Latham posed that question directly to the jury. We posed this question, 2 of them. The implication being, if it was truly an accident involving only Holly, why kill Jessica? The only logical answer, they argued, was to eliminate the witness, driven by his selfish self-interest, likely stemming from a sexual assault.
Okay. So Huntley's defense, led by Stephen Coward QC, that rested entirely on Huntley's own testimony of accidental death, right?
Entirely. Huntley took the stand and repeated the story he'd presumably developed. Holly gets a nosebleed, they go to the bathroom, the bath happens to be filled with water because he was going to watch the dog.
Convenient.
Very convenient. He claims he slipped on the wet floor, accidentally pushed Holly into the full bath, she drowned, and he just panicked and froze.
Right. And Jessica's death. How did he explain that?
Contingent on the first accident. He claimed Jessica saw it happen and screamed, "You pushed her," basically accusing him. So Huntley testified that in his panic, he put his hand over her mouth to stop her screaming and accidentally suffocated her.
Accidentally suffocated her while trying to silence her accusation about the first accidental death. It stretches credibility to breaking point, doesn't it?
It really does, especially when the prosecution meticulously listed all the calculated steps he took immediately afterwards. The intensive cleaning, driving the bodies miles away, burning them with petrol, destroying the clothes, creating the false alibi with Carr, the fake receipt for the tires. None of that screams panic and freeze. It screams methodical cover-up.
So what about Carr's defense? Michael Hubbard QC argued her case. How did they try to mitigate her admitted lie?
Her defense focused heavily on her emotional state, her loyalty to Huntley, and her supposed naivety. She testified that she genuinely believed Huntley's story about the accidental death.
She believed the nosebleed slip suffocation story.
That's what she claimed on the stand. She said she only lied for him because she was terrified he'd be fitted up by the police because of his past rape allegations, which everyone knew about locally. She feared they wouldn't believe his accident story.
Okay. And the cleaning. How did she explain her role in cleaning the house so thoroughly when she got back?
She played on her personality, claiming she was just obsessive about tidiness, a neat freak. She even tried to downplay any suspicion she might have had when she first got back to the house and found, for instance, that Huntley had washed their bedding, something she said he always insisted she must do.
What was her explanation for that?
She claimed her first thought wasn't, "Oh my God, he's covered up a murder scene," but rather that he'd simply had a woman in the house while she was away, trying to paint it as a relationship issue, not a murder cover-up.
So trying to frame her actions as stemming from misplaced loyalty and maybe stupidity rather than active complicity in hiding a murder?
Exactly. Hubbard argued strongly that Carr herself had done no wrong. On the actual day of the murders, she was 150 miles away in Grimsby. Her crime, he argued, was lying afterwards out of misguided loyalty, not because she knew the horrific truth.
Okay. So the jury goes out. They deliberated for 4 days.
4 long days, yeah. The verdicts came back on December 17th, 2003.
And Ian Huntley.
Found guilty on both counts of murder. It was a majority verdict, not unanimous, but guilty nonetheless. Reports said he showed absolutely no emotion as the verdicts were read out.
Just chilling. And Maxine Carr.
Found not guilty of assisting an offender.
Not guilty of assisting. So the jury accepted her defense. That she didn't necessarily know he was guilty of murder when she lied?
It seems they did accept that argument, or at least that the prosecution hadn't proven her knowledge beyond reasonable doubt. But she was found guilty of the charge she'd already admitted, perverting the course of justice, for the lie itself.
Okay. And her sentence for that?
She was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison.
Right. And Huntley's sentencing for the murders, that came a bit later.
Yeah. Sentencing was delayed. It finally happened in September 2005. The judge, Mr. Justice Moses, imposed 2 terms of life imprisonment with a minimum term set at 40 years.
40 years, minimum. So he wouldn't be eligible for parole until 2042. He'd be 68.
That's right.
And the judge made a specific comment about that sentence, didn't he? Something about his chances of release.
He did. He stated the order offers little or no hope of the defendant's eventual release, which sounds almost like a whole life tariff, but technically it wasn't.
Why not? Why didn't he get a formal whole life order, meaning he'd definitely die in prison?
It was down to incredibly precise legal timing. The Criminal Justice Act 2003, the law which gave judges the specific power to impose a formal whole life tariff, actually came into effect just 1 day after Huntley was convicted.
1 day. Wow.
Literally 24 hours later, the law changed. If his verdict had come down a day later, it's almost certain he would have received a whole life order. As it was, the 40-year minimum was the absolute highest punitive sentence available to the judge under the law that applied on the exact day of his conviction.
So the trial gives us the narrative of the crime itself. But to really understand the why and the how, we need to dive into Huntley's background, his criminal profile, because his history is just full of abuse and deception that, frankly, should have rung alarm bells much, much earlier.
Absolutely. Ian Huntley, born 1974, described as a timid kid, apparently quite attention-seeking, bullied a lot at school, that kind of early environment, it can sometimes contribute to later manipulative or aggressive behaviors.
Right.
And interestingly, one of his childhood hobbies was plane spotting, which led him to spend a lot of time hanging around near RAF Lakenheath.
The place he eventually dumped the bodies.
Exactly. So he had this intimate, pre-existing familiarity with that specific, quite remote area. It suggests the disposal site wasn't just chosen in a blind panic. It was likely somewhere he already knew well, maybe even pre-planned on some level.
And his adult relationships, they were violent almost from the start, weren't they? His marriage in 1995 to Claire Evans.
Horrific by all accounts. Short-lived, incredibly volatile. The sources state he regularly sexually assaulted her, subjected her to degrading treatment, physical abuse. It was extreme.
And it led to a miscarriage.
Yes. He apparently beat her so severely on one occasion that she suffered a miscarriage. She eventually left him specifically because of the violence. It shows a really long established pattern of controlling, abusive behavior towards women.
And then there's the trail of sexual misconduct, specifically targeting minors, before Soham. It's just staggering when you lay it out.
It really is. The police investigation after his arrest concluded that Huntley had likely engaged in sexual misconduct with around 60 underage girls over the years. Around 60. Now, many of those didn't result in formal charges, often because the victims were unwilling to testify, or there wasn't enough corroborating evidence back then. But we know for sure about specific relationships. 3 with girls aged 15, 1 with a girl aged just 13, all between 1995 and 1996.
So this wasn't just isolated incidents. It was a sustained pattern of predatory behavior going back years.
Exactly. A clear pattern.
And yet, despite all this, somehow, he was reported to Humberside Police 10 times and social services 5 times.
Yeah.
Before 2002.
That's right. 10 separate reports to the police, 5 to social services. And these weren't minor things. They included multiple allegations of rape in 1998 and a specific allegation of sexual assault on an 11-year-old girl back in 1997.
But none of them stuck.
None resulted in a conviction. They were either dropped by the prosecution, often because the victim understandably felt unable to go through with testifying, or because the evidence was deemed insufficient at the time. The only thing that remained on his record was an outstanding burglary charge from 1995, which is just allowed to sort of sit there, lie on file, unresolved.
This history just completely blows his defense out of the water, doesn't it? He fits the profile of a predator who saw an opportunity.
He was profiled by experts as a latent predatory pedophile who acted opportunistically. The prosecution at trial argued strongly that the motive was sexual, even if they couldn't prove it forensically beyond doubt.
Right. The pathologist, Dr. Nathaniel Carey, he couldn't be certain because of the state of the bodies.
Correct. The decomposition and the fire damage made it medically impossible for him to state conclusively for the jury the precise cause of death or whether a sexual assault had definitely occurred. However, he did testify that some of the pathological evidence recovered suggested that a sexual assault had likely taken place, either just before or just after death.
So, highly likely, just not provable to the criminal standard.
Exactly. But that likelihood provided the context for the prosecution's argument. He murdered both girls to silence them after potentially assaulting one or both.
Okay, let's pivot to Maxine Carr. Her profile, her background, it helps explain maybe why she remained loyal for so long, despite Huntley's obvious volatility.
Yeah, Carr's background is quite different, but also key. Born 1977, she had a difficult childhood, reportedly struggled academically, suffered from anorexia, low self-esteem. Profiles sometimes suggest people with those kinds of vulnerabilities can be more susceptible to manipulation by dominant, controlling partners.
And she met Huntley in 1999.
Yes. And apparently she was instantly attracted to his confidence, which of course we now know was a complete facade masking a deeply abusive nature. They even planned to start a family together.
But their relationship itself was very troubled, wasn't it? Marked by his possessiveness, emotional abuse, even physical violence.
Yes, the sources confirm all of that. It was not a healthy relationship by any means. And interestingly, both of them also apparently conducted affairs outside the relationship. But her professional connection to the victims, that's what made her role so tragically pivotal.
Right. She got the job as a teaching assistant at St. Andrew's Primary, the girls' school.
She did, part-time.
Yeah.
And it later came out she'd actually lied about her qualifications to get the job.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But Holly and Jessica were her pupils, and they were genuinely fond of her. There's that detail about Holly being really upset, crying, when Carr failed to get the full-time teaching post back in July 2002.
So the girls trusted Carr.
Deeply. And that trust, completely inadvertently, got transferred onto Huntley simply because he was her partner. He was Miss Carr's boyfriend.
Which lowered their guard when he approached them. Chilling. There was also that other theory, wasn't there? Linking the murders more directly to an argument he just had with Carr.
Yes, the timing is highly suggestive there. Apparently, Huntley had been sexually frustrated. And just minutes, literally minutes, before the girls walked past his house, he'd had a really heated argument with Carr over the phone.
What about?
She'd told him she was planning to go out socializing that evening in Grimsby instead of maybe coming home sooner. He apparently got very angry and slammed the phone down.
Okay.
This led some people, including Huntley's own mother apparently, and some police investigators, to speculate that maybe the murders weren't solely about pre-planned sexual predation. Maybe it was also, or instead, a sudden fit of explosive, jealous rage. And the girls just happened to be there, vulnerable targets for him to lash out at as proxies for Carr.
So a conflicting possibility. Rage rather than pure predation. Or maybe a mix.
It's possible. It just emphasizes the complexity and the sudden, terrifying volatility of his character. It wasn't necessarily one single motive.
And we have to mention the tape confession revelation, post-conviction. That came after another suicide attempt in 2006.
That's right. He tried to kill himself again, and a cassette tape was recovered from his cell. It seemed intended as sort of posthumous confession.
And what did he claim on that tape? It gave a very different version of Carr's involvement, didn't it?
Radically different. On the tape, Huntley claimed he had actually confessed the murders to Carr before they were arrested.
He told her he'd killed him.
That's what he alleged on the tape. And he claimed her reaction wasn't horror or calling the police. He alleged she slapped him, told him to pull himself together because she was terrified of losing her teaching position if he was caught.
Wow. And did he claim she helped with the cover-up?
Yes. He went further, alleging on the tape that it was Carr who encouraged him to burn the bodies, specifically to destroy the forensic evidence.
Okay, but this was never tested in court. Was it seen as credible?
No, it was never tested in court, and it was largely dismissed by authorities and commentators as a self-serving attempt by Huntley to try and drag Carr down with him to share the blame after the fact. But it certainly paints a much darker, though unproven, picture of her potential knowledge and complicity.
Regardless of whether it's true, it just shows his pattern, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Always shifting blame, always trying to manipulate the narrative to protect himself, even years later from inside prison.
Absolutely consistent with the Bichard inquiry. But perhaps the biggest, most lasting impact of the Soham murders wasn't just the horror of the crime itself, but the way it threw this incredibly harsh spotlight onto institutional incompetence. Systemic failure.
You mean how Huntley got the job at the school in the first place?
Exactly. He should never, ever have been hired as the senior caretaker at Soham Village College back in 2001. This was a position of trust. He supervised 4 other employees, he had keys, he had access to the school grounds, access to children.
No. So how did he slip through the net? What was the specific vetting failure?
It was a cascade of failures, really. First, he applied for the job using an alias Ian Nixon, which was actually his mother's maiden name.
Okay, but did he hide his real name?
No, and this is the crucial point. He did disclose his birth name, Ian Huntley, on the official application form. But Cambridgeshire police, who were responsible for the vetting check, they failed completely to run a background check under the name Ian Huntley.
They just didn't check his real name.
Apparently not properly, no. If they had done that basic standard check, they would have instantly found that outstanding burglary charge from 1995 still sitting on his file.
Which wasn't the most serious thing, but it would have been a flag.
It would have been a definite red flag. It would have triggered further, deeper inquiries into his history, likely uncovering the more serious allegations held by Humberside police.
And the school itself messed up, too. The head teacher admitted failures.
Yes. The head teacher of Soham Village College later admitted they hadn't properly checked Huntley's references before offering him the job. So you had police vetting failures combined with the school's procedural failures. It was, as you said earlier, a perfect storm of overlooked warnings.
Just catastrophic. And this breakdown, this is what led directly to the Bichard inquiry.
Immediately, the then Home Secretary, David Blunkett, announced a full public inquiry led by Sir Michael Bichard in 2004. Its specific mandate was to investigate the intelligence systems, the record-keeping, and the vetting procedures used by police forces and other agencies involved with children.
And Bichard's findings were pretty scathing, weren't they? Particularly towards Humberside police and Cambridgeshire police, but for different reasons.
That's the key insight from the inquiry, yes. The failures were different but equally devastating. Humberside police were criticized primarily for a policy error.
A policy error?
They had adopted a very strict, arguably flawed, interpretation of the Data Protection Act. This policy led them to routinely delete records of criminal allegations against individuals if those allegations didn't result in a conviction.
So they deleted Huntley's history. The rape allegations, the assault claim.
Yes. Because he was never convicted, they argued they couldn't legally hold that non-conviction data indefinitely. So, critical intelligence about his pattern of alleged offending was wiped from their systems. It meant a full picture of his risk could never be formed or shared properly.
Unbelievable. In Cambridgeshire police, their failure was different.
Their failure was purely procedural. They simply failed to follow existing standard vetting guidelines properly. They had the name Ian Huntley on the form, but they didn't check it thoroughly against police databases. The inquiry also slammed the devastating delay it took Cambridgeshire police nearly 2 weeks after the girls vanished to become fully aware of Huntley's extensive history held by Humberside, even though he was an obvious, early, high-profile suspect right on their doorstep.
So you had one force deleting history because of policy, and another force failing to do basic checks because of procedure. And that combination allowed this known high-risk individual to become an insider working right next to children.
That's the tragic bottom line. And the recommendations that came out of the Bichard inquiry were genuinely transformative for child protection and public safety in the UK.
They were the main ones.
Bichard recommended creating a mandatory registration scheme for everyone working or seeking to work with children and vulnerable adults. Much tighter controls.
And this led to new organizations.
Yes, it led directly to the foundation of the Independent Safeguarding Authority, ISA, which later merged into the Disclosure and Barring Service, DBS, that we have today.
The DBS check, right?
Exactly. The inquiry significantly tightened up the procedures within the whole Criminal Records Bureau system. It made comprehensive background checks compulsory, and crucially, it established principles for how police should handle and share non-conviction information, those allegations that didn't lead to court when assessing someone's suitability for working with vulnerable groups. The entire aim was to close those gaps, to ensure that a bureaucratic and procedural failure of this magnitude could never, ever happen again.
It's hard to process the sheer scale of this case, even the physical aftermath. They demolished the house, didn't they? 5 college close.
They did. It was demolished quite quickly in April 2004. The rubble was apparently taken away and disposed of at undisclosed locations, just leaving a vacant patch of grass there now. An attempt, I suppose, to erase the physical scar on the community.
But the perpetrators, their stories continue, don't they? Huntley is still serving that 40-year minimum sentence.
Yes. And his time inside has been violent. He's faced repeated attacks from other inmates, high-profile ones, too.
Like what?
He was badly scalded with boiling water by Mark Hobson, another notorious killer. And later, another inmate, Damien Fowkes, slashed his throat with a makeshift weapon. He survived both, but it shows the level of animosity towards him within the prison system.
And didn't he try to sue the prison service over those attacks?
He did, bizarrely. He sought compensation claims. Reports suggested up to £20,000, arguing the prison service had failed in its duty of care to protect him, a convicted child killer, from other dangerous inmates.
Just incredible audacity.
Mm.
And Maxine Carr, what happened to her?
Her fate is unique, really. She served 21 months of her 3.5-year sentence and was released in May 2004. But because of credible extreme threats against her life, people wanting vigilante justice, she was granted a lifelong anonymity injunction by the High Court in 2005.
Lifelong anonymity, meaning her new identity, her location, can never be published.
Exactly. It's a permanent protection order. The cost of maintaining that level of secrecy, police protection, potential relocation, monitoring is huge. Speculated to run into millions of pounds over her lifetime, all funded by the taxpayer.
And that secrecy itself has caused problems, hasn't it? Innocent women being wrongly identified as her.
Tragically, yes. The intense media interest and public hatred have led to at least a dozen completely innocent women being falsely identified as Maxine Carr, often by tabloids or online mobs, facing harassment and abuse as a result. It's a grim side effect of the necessary secrecy.
So when we look back at this whole devastating case, what's the core insight for someone listening to this? What should we take away?
I think the key learning, if you can call it that, is understanding where the failure really lay. You had this incredible search effort, this massive outpouring of community spirit and police dedication trying to find the girls. That wasn't the failure. The failure happened before they disappeared. It was rooted in that quiet background noise of procedural bureaucracy, flawed data management, poor information sharing between forces, and inadequate vetting.
And that failure put Huntley in a position of trust.
Precisely. It made him an insider. You know, the girls' parents had taught them, well, don't trust strangers, be wary. But Huntley wasn't just a random stranger. He was the school caretaker. He was Miss Carr's boyfriend. Their beloved teaching assistant vouched for him implicitly. Their tragic trust wasn't in a stranger. It was in someone who had gained proximity and familiarity through systemic failure. And that's what ultimately cost them their lives.
And one final thought. Huntley's persistent denial, even years later. He confessed in 2007 to that earlier 1997 sexual assault, finally admitting he did have a sexual interest in children.
Yes, a significant admission.
Yet, in the same breath, he continued to insist steadfastly that the Soham murders themselves were not sexually motivated. He clung rigidly to his accidental death narrative for Holly and Jessica. What does that final fundamental contradiction tell us? That admission of interest but denial of motive in this specific horrific crime? What does it suggest about the ultimate truth behind his refusal to ever accept full responsibility for the intentional murders of those two little girls?